Well, hello, and thank you for joining me on the Daily Connection. It's a time when we get together in the Word. More importantly, the Word gets into us. So we're now into the book of Exodus. We're very much into the Exodus event itself because now we're told the people are at Mount Sinai. In fact, if we look at chapter 19, which is the very last chapter of our reading today, we're told in verse 1 that it's in the third month from the very day that the Israelites left the land of Egypt. They came to the Sinai wilderness. They encamped in front of the mountain. And of course, the mountain is going to be Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. You get three different titles, but it's the place where God had already told Moses when he first appeared to him, this is how you know that I'm the one sending you, Moses, that you're going to worship me on this mountain. So they're now here. But I want us to look at verses 3 through 6 and really dig into that just a little bit. Moses went up to the mountain of God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain. This is what you must say to the house of Jacob and explain to the Israelites. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will carefully listen to me and keep my covenant, you will be my own possession out of all the peoples, although the whole earth is mine, and you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. These are the words that you are to say to the Israelites. All right, so we're told that we're now 3 months into the Exodus event. They've seen a lot. In fact, it's interesting to me that when God references what he's done, he says in verse 4, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians. Now, that's one thing. Of course, we know the plagues were devastating. The plagues were intended for several things. Number one, to show Israel, confirm to Israel that God was indeed honoring his covenant agreement to provide for the people, to protect the people, to lead the people and redeem them out from under Egyptian bondage. It was to demonstrate to the people that he was superior to any other quote-unquote little g God, because of all the plagues were unleashed towards some aspect of a polytheistic God worship in Egypt. And it demonstrated that God was superior to them, so that they were not to forget that. So Egypt was a dynamic experience, every part of it calculated carefully by God in order to demonstrate to the people that he is superior, even to one like Pharaoh who declared himself to be a God. God devastated Pharaoh. So he says, hey, remember what I did for you in Egypt. But from that point, there are many other things that happen. Of course, we know we have the parting of the Red Sea, where God brought them across on dry land, and he set them apart from the Egyptians by, first of all, confusing the Egyptians, and then ultimately devastating them again by bringing the water over. So again, he has separated them out from the Egyptians, both in how he showed his power over them and how he has provided for the people, because as he led them through the wilderness, he describes it here as carried you on eagle's wings. He was doing that by providing them water when they couldn't find any water, providing them shelter in certain instances, providing them food with the manna and with the quail. Everything that they possibly needed in terms of provision, God gave it to them, and he was directing them the whole time. They were following the cloud by day, the fire by night. God was leading them to the mountain for worship. So everything he's done thus far has been to set them apart. And look at the description. Now, if you'll carefully listen to me, and you keep my covenant, you will be, one, my own possession out of all the peoples, although the whole earth is mine. So first of all, he says, you will be my possession. And then secondly, he says, well, let me pause there for a moment. He says, you be my possession. He says, I'm setting you apart from all the peoples on the whole earth. Let me tell you something, friends. We still need to remember that. We still must keep that in mind as we look across the whole geopolitical landscape of the planet. It's very diverse in terms of government structures, in terms of ideologies, but one thing still remains the same, and we can't deny this because Bible makes it clear. Israel still remains God's people. Israel still is under in that covenant, although many of Israel, or some, let me say it that way, reject any notion of being submitted to God and serving God and obeying his word, yet still they're God's people. And so for us to abandon God's people, for us to, and I pray this never happens, to come against Israel, God's people, would then put us under, the possibility of discipline of God, God bringing his judgment on us as a country, and that's not a place we want to be. So I think that's one of the things we need to pay attention to here. Number two, he says in verse 6, you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. Now, if those words sound familiar, they should, because in 1 Peter chapter 2, we see starting in verse 5, you yourselves as living stones, a spiritual house, are being built to be a holy priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God. We also know that in 1 Peter chapter 2 that we are called a people, we're God's chosen people, a royal priesthood, honored by God. So some of the same language that God used to speak to the people in Exodus, Peter then applies that to now the new covenant people. That's us, the children of God, saying, hey, you're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a people for his own possession. So we have that same covenant promise through Christ now granted to us. We've been grafted in. And we have that promise of protection. We have that promise of provision. We have that promise that God will never leave us or forsake us. So his presence will always be with us. And that's what he was saying to the people. He said, hey, think about everything you've seen and witnessed, first in Egypt, then throughout the wilderness wanderings to here. Don't forget that, because you're special to me. You are to me a kingdom of priests. You are a holy nation set apart from all the other nations on the planet. That wasn't just to help people, Israel, feel special. That was to help them to understand that you can trust God and you should obey God. Isn't it what it said in verse 5? Now, if you will carefully listen to me and keep my covenant. And it's the same way with us, really. Our salvation didn't come about by us obeying laws and ordinances. However, our salvation is enriched and maintained by us living in obedience to the will of God, submitted to his will as revealed in his word. And so as we see Israel entering into this time of covenant agreement that's going to happen here at Sinai, let's understand that that's predicated on God's goodness to them and them responding obediently to his will in response to that goodness. And we can do the same. We can look back over our life and we can see where God was working, how God was moving, how God was positioning us and positioning others around us to, number one, hear his gospel, respond to his gospel, and then hopefully to be discipled in the word so that we can then turn around and be a faithful servant of his. And that's what he's called us to do today. There's so many things that's already going through our mind. If you're watching this in the morning, you already got a lot of things on your mind. You got a lot of things on your to-do list. But the one thing should be primary. We should love God supremely. And the second one should follow along with that. We should seek to love each other as we love ourselves. Love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And we love sacrificially. And then ultimately, that's going to lead us to go out and, you know where I'm going with this, live sent.